Let's go. Thank you everyone for coming to this presentation. Hello, my name is Lukas Kunce and I'm from Amanita Design, where I work as a PR and marketing person as well as a production person. And today I've come here to tell you a little bit about the happy life of Happy Game and hopefully say something of interest to you. The main reason I'm here is that Happy Game was nominated for 2 SIGA awards here in Poznań, which is really sweet and we're really grateful for that. But we were kind of surprised to receive like 2 nominations, especially the Best Game of the Year one, because, well, you'll see what the game is. So Happy Game is a video game for PC and Nintendo Switch made by Amanita Design, which is an indie studio based in the beautiful city of Prague in Czech Republic, although many people still believe we're still based in Brno, which was where the studio was originally founded in 2003, nearly 20 years ago. And we've been making mostly adventure games since 2003. And our most recent titles include Pilgrims and Creaks, both of which are available on Apple Arcade as well as PC. And Creaks is on all the major platforms on consoles as well. And some of you may have heard of this game too. But today I'm here to talk about a very different Amanita Design game. A game that is not about exploring the beautiful environments or completing tasks for some strange but friendly characters or even just enjoying the calm atmosphere. There's no calm atmosphere in a Happy Game. Nope. Before we continue, I'm gonna try to read some bits of this. If you are sensitive to either flashing imagery, blood, or violence, be cautious. There's rarely anything else to see in Happy Game. You'll often see blood on the floor, witness the decapitation of adorable bunnies, and much more. No filter. Please note, Happy Game is not a happy game. So you might have noticed that the title of the game might be slightly deceptive. This is a warning that appears every time you boot up the game. I never really expected to see a warning like this in an Amanita Design game, but we thought we really needed one in this one, and in the store description as well. Like, imagine a nice, kind parent of a young Amanita Design fan who asks their parent to get them this nice new Amanita Design game called Happy Game. Like, what could possibly go wrong? I'll show you the short trailer in a little bit, but one of the more memorable stories I associate with the development of Happy Game was when we agreed to announce the title in cooperation with Nintendo through one of their Indie World streams. So we sent them the trailer, they liked it, but there were some things that needed to be changed. And we needed to send the trailer to the ESRB, the American Age Rating Organization. And this is the feedback we got from them. So there were some characters impaled on a spike, some blood, more blood, characters decapitated, blood, and blood. So we needed to edit those, basically censor them. And once we removed it, everything was okay, and we could announce the game with Nintendo. And now I'm going to show you the trailer uncensored. Oh no, we don't have sound. Sorry about the audio, hopefully you heard at least something. Now, one of the questions you might be asking when you see that for the first time is why? What happened to those people? Well, there's basically one main person to blame, which is Jaromír Plachý, a multi-talented human, cartoonist, animator, as well as game designer who joined Amanita Design almost 15 years ago to create some additional animations for this game. And since then, he directed 3 full-length games of his own at Amanita, as you can see in this detailed timeline. But the one that is most important to Happy Game's later development is Chuchel. Now, Jaromír's previous title, Chuchel, or Čučel, is like a polar opposite of Happy Game in terms of the mood and the themes, I mean. Like, in terms of gameplay, it's quite similar. It's a fairly minimalistic point-and-click adventure. But Chuchel is like super cheerful, whimsical, friendly, positively silly, and well, just, funny and full of laughter. But as Jaromír says, when you laugh too much for a while and for too long, you might get a sort of a spasm in your face, and that's pretty much what metaphorically happened here. So after several years with Huchel, there was like very strong creative need and desire to make something like really different. And Jaromír took no prisoners here. He says he conceived the game during a time when he was interested in similarly weird things. So, for example, he's really into the Twin Peaks TV series. He also said he read all of H.P. Lovecraft's book during that period, and he was just into horror in general. But Happy Game wasn't the very first dark and creepy product of Jaromír's mind. In 2013, a rather strange music video for a really nice song Mulatu from the band Dva, Czech band Dva, was born. Obviously, Dva are the band who have made music and audio for all of Jaromír's games so far at Amanita, so Botanicula, Huchel, and most recently Happy Game. I recommend that you look up this video later on YouTube because it's a good song and a good music video. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to watch it in full today, but I'm going to show you at least a few screenshots so you get the idea of the visual aesthetic, and probably you already see some similarities and similar topics and themes like the creepy smiley faces and psychedelic colors, really strange, disturbing creatures. Here you can see the creepy smiley faces again and heart-shaped creatures that, although were redesigned, let's say, made it into Happy Game a few years later. And in general, it's just easy to see that this music video was really the starting point for Happy Game. These are some of the very first early sketches made with the actual game in mind. And it's also when we decided on the name, like at the very beginning, it was called Happy Game, and throughout the years, we just didn't come up with anything else. We just like it. It's in just such a stark contrast to everything that happens in the game. It's also very simple, kind of catchy, Happy Game, and somehow we felt that it fits the game perfectly in an ironic sort of a way. This is a concept that is a bit different from the final in-game iteration. However, the main idea is there. A little boy lies in his bed in some sort of a creepy room. There's this demon who is driving these nightmares into his head, and he falls asleep to a truly horrible nightmare. And this is a screenshot from the basically opening scene of the game. This is where it begins. Again, there's this little boy in a bed, a demon, and yeah, bad things are coming for him. Obviously, not all of these concepts made it into the game, and maybe that's for the better. One more of these early concepts. Now, Jaromír Plachy is not just extremely creative, he's also extremely fast in the execution of his ideas. So once he had a more complex idea of what Happy Game could be, he, being a very skilled animator, puts together what he calls a fake trailer to a non-existent game, yet non-existent. And the whole point of that trailer was to present it to our studio director, Jakub Dvorský, and hopefully convince him that it is a good idea to make a really weird psychedelic horror game under the Amanita brand. The key meeting with Jakub happened on October 19th, 2014, at the Suchá Daseň pub in Prague, in this classic pub not far from the city center, at this very table. I recommend the pub, they've got really good beer there. The interesting part of this story, though, is that there was like a massive blackout in Prague on that night. It was also back when you could still smoke inside restaurants. So with the lights out and cigarette smell all around, it was just the perfect atmosphere to present something like that. So perhaps that's why Jakub thought it was indeed a good idea to make a really weird psychedelic horror game. And then we went on to finding a programmer for the project. We were lucky to find David Šemík, who wasn't just the programmer, he participated heavily on the design of the projects and the game ideas together with Jaromír. They were the two main creative forces, together with Jakub Dvorský, who helped them supervise the design. David Šemík also previously worked on this absolute legend of a game. And so we could finally start production on Happy Game. And roughly 7 happy years later, the game was almost ready for release, which leads me to when and how we released the game. When we were announcing Happy Game in cooperation with Nintendo, like I mentioned previously, we agreed that we would release the game simultaneously on both PC and Switch. So right after we were finished with the, let's say, primary PC version, we moved on to the Switch port. That, of course, came with a bunch of interesting problems to solve, most of which were related to the controls. That's because Happy Game was originally designed to be played with a mouse, like a typical point-and-click adventure. You control a cursor and touch, but in this case, in Happy Game's case, you not only touch objects, you drag them. So when you, for example, need to tear something Z off, you really need to like physically move the mouse and feel the pain of the creature, I guess. In the end, we decided to go with a traditional cursor map to the left stick on Nintendo Switch. What is unusual, though, is that we mapped the character movement, which is also directly controlled, to the right stick. So it's kind of counterintuitive because usually it's the other way around. But the decision was made based on the fact that the player spent much more time controlling the cursor rather than moving the character, which is a secondary mechanic in case of Happy Game. Anyway, the Nintendo version and the fact that we needed to release it simultaneously with PC, like Steam and etc., meant that the game's release date would mostly be impacted and influenced by Nintendo. In case you don't know, on Steam and other PC platforms, the publishing process is like much easier than it is on consoles. The approval processes for both store listings and game builds are like nowhere near as thorough as with Nintendo. You also need to have separate store listings approved for 5 different regions on Nintendo. Some regions operate a bit differently than others, so you really need to take a little bit of an extra care and timing when picking release date for your Switch game. Coincidentally, we were wrapping up the Switch port a few weeks before Halloween. That's pretty much a perfect release date for any horror game, perhaps. And at some point, with all the things considered, and the biggest factor was that we wanted to release it just before Halloween, everything pointed to the date of 28th of October, 2021. And so we decided to target this date and really do everything we can to make it and release it on that day. Now, this may look completely unrelated, but it will make sense. Every year at Amanita, we have a big gathering in a cottage, usually somewhere in the mountains, where we spend a few days together just playing each other's games, because we have several independent teams within Amanita, just chatting, drinking some beer, and just having a good time together. And one of those weekend gatherings started on the 5th of October, which was also the last day. It was theoretically possible for us to submit a build to Nintendo and have it approved in time and also released in time on the 28th of October that we targeted. That realization was pretty stressful at first, and we were unsure whether we were actually going to be able to make it, to submit the build and travel to the mountains with our teammates. The reality was that we were not able to travel to the mountains. We means me, Jaromír, and David. All day we were just squishing bugs, and later in the afternoon we decided to just push through it, focus on it, and then spend literally all day and night working on these bugs, working on those fixes, and trying our hardest to make it happen. And I remember that we really spent several hours on Skype, just trying to stay sane and pushing through it. And there was definitely a bit of nervousness back then and worries that we might not make it. But just around midnight, after endless tests and discussions, we managed to submit a build to Nintendo. And the next day, we traveled to join our mates in the mountains, full of hope. And another few days later, the Nintendo Switch build was finally approved. And that, for me, was one of the happiest Happy Game moments, like considering the last-minute effort that we made as a team. That was quite satisfying. And a few weeks later, it finally really came out on October 28th. And every time we release a game, we're of course very curious about the reception. So what did people think about it? Well, Happy Game is unusual for many reasons. And one of them could be that we didn't really expect, or we didn't really have a clue what people were going to think about the game, whether it's Amanita fans or just the general audience. We only released a short playable demo on Steam at the beginning of 2021. Which gave players a little glimpse of what to expect, but it was just the intro of the game, and we were hiding the worst bits of the game from everyone until the game finally came out later that year, except maybe for a few short clips that we put on our socials and YouTube, but those never really went viral or anything. And also because of COVID, there were basically no events where we could go and watch players play the game and like react naturally in real time. So it was kind of a mystery to us. And at the same time, we didn't want to mislead anyone. So we always clearly stated that Happy Game is a psychedelic horror because when you just see the game and some of the pictures, it can be a bit misleading. Some of them are like cutesy and colorful, and you could think, yeah, this is a child-friendly game, but it's not. So even in the minimalistic store descriptions, we try to choose words that indicate that although this is indeed an Amanita Design game, it is far different from you would usually expect from that studio. There was probably some space to like mystify and mislead people on purpose. That could be fun, I believe. But in the end, we decided that it didn't seem such a great idea, considering our past releases and our audience as well. The communication for Happy Game was rather low-key in general. We wanted the crazy imagery to speak for itself, but at the same time, with a game like this, which some may describe as interactive animation perhaps, and which only takes 2 to 3 hours to complete, and each playthrough is pretty much identical. You just don't want to show too much before you release it. Yet we ended up with 3 actual trailers for Happy Game, and since we didn't want to show more in-game footage than we had already shown, we needed to get a little bit creative with the final launch trailer. Thank you. So yeah, that's Happy Game. So what did people actually think? Well, for starters, critics didn't hate it, which is great. On OpenCritic, the game holds an average score of 74. On Metacritic, it's 81, which is a bit better than I initially expected, to be honest. But of course, the number of reviews isn't that huge, so it just doesn't say that much. But even though none of the critics gave a straight-up bad review, some of them made very fair points about some of the game's elements. The most common negative point was that it was quite short, 2 to 3 hours, for some people even shorter, and the simplicity of gameplay, which is always kind of ambivalent because, of course, for an experienced gamer, Happy Game will feel a bit short and maybe a bit simple, but on the other hand, for the casual audience, a shorter and easier gaming experience is often preferred. Most of the reviewers then praised the game's aesthetic and unusual approach to horror as a genre, which we're really happy about. The most fun reviews, of course, come from the players who bought the game. This guy is speaking the truth, fair enough. We're gonna try to fix it in an upcoming title. User reviews like this one were very much expected and perfectly understandable. Like even if you're a long-time Amanita fan, the whole vibe of Happy Game can be quite off-putting, I guess, and just not for you. That happens. And then there are the positive reviews. Depression. This one is clear enough. This one, if it's not meant just as a joke, it kind of indicates that the game's themes might be relatable in some way and even uncomfortable on a more personal level, which is probably a great thing if you're making horror. And the most accurate review of all, Happy Game is not a happy game. And this is just a summary of all the Steam reviews, with 91% of them being positive, which is quite nice. Now, I mentioned earlier that none of our promotional materials ever came viral, which is the sad truth, but that doesn't mean that Happy Game wasn't seen by millions. Streamers, somehow even the most high-profile streamers picked up on the game without us being involved at all. They didn't reach out to us for keys, we didn't reach out to them. I'm not sure if you can see the numbers of the views, but each of these videos has between 3 to 6 million views, and there's dozens of them on YouTube. Like cumulatively, there's over 100 million views on Happy Game playthroughs just on YouTube. That is an insane number that must have totally caused like a dramatic spike in sales, right? Except it didn't. I can't give you the exact numbers, but this is a sales graph that shows sales, obviously. The spike at the beginning is the launch, and then there's like a very tiny, barely noticeable bump around December 10th, which coincides with Markiplier's first video, but that's pretty much it. And this wasn't the first time we experienced this, actually, sorry. We also experienced the same thing with Huchel in 2018. Again, Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, and many such big guys on YouTube picked up on the game themselves, streamed it to millions of their fans, and it just didn't really do anything to the Steam statistics. So my sort of advice or just opinion on this is, if you're making a linear short adventure game like this one, where each playthrough is practically identical, you probably don't really need to waste your energy on streamers. Because my impression is that their audiences come to spend time with their favorite persona rather than look for new stuff to buy, especially when the stuff it will give them basically no new experience if they've already watched the playthrough. So that's our experience with streamers. This is the entire crew that worked on Happy Game throughout the years. Everybody deserves a massive thank you and respect for staying sane, staring at this hellish creation for hundreds of hours. And the work on Happy Game hasn't stopped yet. We're still working on it because we're preparing versions for mobile devices, which are hopefully not too far from release. And I think that's the best way to play Happy Game, because you suddenly have this more physical contact with what's happening on the screen, and suddenly it's a little bit more immersive, I guess. And with that, I've run out of slides and out of time. Thank you for your attention. I'm not sure if we have any time for questions. One question. There's a man over there in the blue shirt.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Roman. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Forgive my bluntness, but did you say 7 years?
I did. Crazy, isn't it?
What were the major roadblocks which you encountered?
Roadblocks. Yeah. Well, there was how to say it? Well, the game looks very simple, doesn't it? And it seems like there's not a lot of gameplay elements to it, but there's actually a lot. Like, each scene was made sort of individually, like almost a sort of individual game, which is probably why it took so long. It's not based on just one system, but each scene, like, it's its own thing. So, and we also had just one programmer on the project who was also involved in, helping with designing the thing. So it was mostly technical stuff. The design of the game, the actual design and ideas for it, and the art itself, that was done a few years after 2014. But then it was, the technical part, programming, that took a long time. And squishing bugs, obviously, there were lots of bugs. And we did lots of playtesting in-house, and just playing it repeatedly and trying to make it perfect.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.